Okay, hi guys. My name is David Villarreal. I'm a sophomore at Benjamin Franklin College at Yale. I am from Monterrey, Mexico, a city near the border with the US in Northeast Mexico. And I study computer science and economics. Sheri?
Hey everyone, my name is Sheri. I'm from Nairobi, Kenya, where I currently am. I am in Grace Hopper College, which is objectively the best college on campus. And much like David, I study computer science and economics.
Great. So today we're going to be answering some of y'all's questions about Yale, about extracurriculars, about the international community, and what it's like to be an international student at Yale. So let's get right to it, Shadi.
Yeah, I guess we'll start by mentioning some of the things that we do on campus. So on campus, I'm involved with the dance community. And so I'm in two dance groups, and that's Yale's STEP team and Yale's African dance group. I've also been involved in non-audition groups. So if you're interested in that, just feel free to reach out and I'll answer questions about that. I'm also involved with the international student community, primarily through two organizations. That's the Yale Association for African Peace and Development and the Yale African Students Association. And they're both under the Afro-American Cultural Center. So I can also talk about what it's like with cultural centers on campus. I have dipped into a few things like the Yale Daily News and the Yale College Council. So I'd love to talk about any of that. But that's just a small view of the things I'm involved in. And if any of them speak to you, then please feel free to ask any questions about them. And David?
Cool. So I've also been all over the place at Yale. I've tried out a wealth of, different extracurricular activities on campus and cultural groups. I think for me, one of my coolest experiences at Yale is that I'm part of the Yale polo team, despite having never ridden a horse before Yale. So this is one of the new things I've tried out at Yale, which is super cool. I'm also part of different Latin American groups, such as SUBE, which is a leadership club centered around Latin American life. And I'm also part of the Mexican Student Organization, which I love. And we host different cultural events around campus, which is one of the things I love doing because I love, talking about to people about my Mexican culture. So, Sheri, should we get on to some of the questions we've received? So feel free to jot down some of your questions if you have any on the Facebook Live. Say your name, where you're from, and what your question is, and we'll try to get through as many questions as we possibly can. Sounds cool. So the first question, Sheri, what was your first impression of Yale when you got here?
Oh, okay. I love this question. So I arrived just a day before OIS, which is International Students Pre-Orientation Program. And I came in through the pre-orient transport scheme that's done by the Office of International Students and Scholars. And so I arrived in a shuttle, and there was this Polish dude that was sitting beside me, and I thought, why not make a new friend? And we, hit it off and spoke the whole way over, and we're super excited and just shared our experiences and our trauma from the IB. If you did do the IB, please reach out. And immediately I got on campus, I was met by my OIS counselors, and they were so sweet and forthcoming. They also carried my luggage, which was quite a bit, and they lugged it up all the stairs, and they were sweaty, I was sweaty, but we were hugging, and it was fantastic. And so the nervousness that I had quickly dissipated, and I was already welcomed into the international community and to OIS. So it was a really lovely introduction to Yale.
Yeah.
What about you?
I think I had a somewhat similar experience. I mean, all of us, are flying to New York and getting to New Haven from literally every corner of the world. And it's a long journey, you're going for the first time to Yale, maybe even to the US, and it can be very nerve-wracking, but very exciting at the same time. And you get to Yale, you're super tired. I remember getting there at like 2 a.m., super tired. And the first thing, that happened to me when I got on campus was I met my OAS counselors, which are basically the people who are in charge of you know, giving you your key and your Yale ID and making sure you're comfortable during your first days during international orientation. And so like greeting them, and they had a huge smile on their faces and super excited to have me there, even at 2 a.m. Right. And it's just very, very nice to sort of get at, like, after experiencing such a, you know, hectic journey, to be greeted with a smile on their face, which I think is pretty representative of the international community at Yale.
Yeah, totally agree.
Okay, so next, what are some of the traditions or customs you've shared with your friends at Yale, Sheri?
Yeah, so one of my favorite, I guess I'll call it a custom, but the favorite thing that I've been able to share has been music. And so I had a pretty big suite in my first year. There was 8 of us within one suite, but everybody was super forthcoming. Everybody else was American except for myself. But they were super forthcoming about learning about my culture. And so it started with me playing music in the shower while getting ready. And it slowly evolved into them asking questions about the kind of music that I played and me playing it for them regularly. And so being able to see my friends, you know, jamming to Kenyan music was a really interesting experience. And it really colored my life positively. And I really enjoyed being in a suite that was so different and mixed, but that was able to celebrate those differences.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things I love the most about my culture is its food. Mexican food is amazing if you've never tried it. And there's a food called chilaquiles in Mexico that I really, really love. And when it was my birthday party last year in September, I had a big celebration in the kitchen of my residential college, where I made all of my friends some of the food I grew up eating, and they absolutely loved it. And I don't know, I think it's super cool to get to know people from all around the world and some of the traditions they have at home, and get to, you know, eat their food and hear their stories. It's amazing, and it's a huge community at Yale. Okay, Sheri, could you talk about a time you experienced a culture shock in the US?
Yeah. So I think for me, the biggest forms of culture shock, I can give two. One is a very small thing that I'm still not used to until today. So in Kenya, with how we refer to our floors, we have the ground floor first, and then the first floor, and then the second floor. But in the US, they don't have a ground floor, so it's a first floor. So many a time, my friends would tell me, "Come meet me on the third floor," and then I'd climb up an extra flight of stairs, and I'd wait there for a good 3 minutes, and wonder where they were. And it's just taken me time to adapt in that sense. So there's always these small things like spelling color with a U or without a U that still kind of surprise me. But it's always cause for a good laugh. It cracks my American friends up. When I climb an extra flight of stairs, not so much, but all of the times it's a really good point of conversation. And I think the other thing was the weather, because I'm from a very warm country. And so getting used to New Haven winters was quite a ride. But I had so much support. My suite mate gave me a scarf that I wore for most of the semester just because it was very pretty, but also because it was very, nice of her to extend that. And so people were super supportive in getting me used to it. I'm still adapting. I'll keep you posted, but those were probably the two biggest things that I'm still trying to adapt to slowly.
I think for me, speaking of weather, was the fact that people in the US use Fahrenheit, not Celsius. I've been here for, I've been in the US for almost 2 years, and I still cannot figure out how degrees Fahrenheit work. I don't know if 40 degrees Fahrenheit is below zero or above zero in Celsius terms. Super funny. But I think another interesting thing about the US, at least compared to Mexico, is that people eat much earlier. For example, I ate lunch at like 3 p.m. at home, whereas in the US it's normal to eat lunch at like 12, which completely breaks my mind. But you start within your years at Yale, you start like figuring these things out, and it's super cool to like adapt to a new culture, new country. Okay, Constanza from Italy asks, how is the international community at Yale? Is it big, and how well does it mix with the Americans?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I believe that the international community tends to range at around 200 students per year. So altogether, it adds up to a really large community of internationals. Um, I've, I think the way in which that I've seen how big it is that every week, few weeks or so, I meet someone new and they say they're from, Sweden or they're from Tanzania. And I'm like, I have never seen you on campus. Where have you been? So it's small enough that you get to know people very well, but it's big enough that there'll be a new person to meet almost always, which I really enjoy personally. In terms of how the community mixes with the Americans, I'd say pretty well. There's of course the really nice time before all the Americans arrive on campus during OIS, when the internationals are all together and we get to know each other in like a really compact amount of time, and that's absolutely fantastic. But once we get the Americans in, everyone just gels in. It's also partly because of the great foundation that OIS provides, but it's also just because Americans are so willing to learn about our cultures and just cool people in general. And so everyone mixes in pretty well, but there's also times when the international community comes back together for little reunions or little events throughout the semester. So it's the perfect balance of having all your internationals and getting to know them and feeling, at home with them, but also getting to know all the other students that come to Yale, and like driving between the two different communities constantly. So it's a really nice experience, I'd say, in terms of size and in terms of closeness. But that's been my experience. What about you, David?
I think I had a very similar experience. Like, I think you get to Yale, and for almost a week, you're just with international students. These are the first people you meet on campus. And so it's amazing to sort of be with a group that sort of shares the same, um, it shares completely different experiences from you, but has the same, questions about, international life at Yale, that is experiencing the same cultural shocks that you are. So like you're all in this boat together. And I think it's one of the coolest things that sort of brings the international community together, as Sheri said. And it's a very nice community, and getting to see them again through different events that the International Student Office and the International Student Organization hosts every year. I think it's a super nice experience.
Mhm.
Okay, Sheri, how do you deal with homesickness? What Yale resources have helped you overcome that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have to fly 15 hours to get to the US, so home is very far. And that's definitely been a challenge, but there's been so many amazing resources that I've been able to use. Bless you. So the first that I'd like to mention is the OISS-PL. So OISS, first things first, there's very many acronyms. Yaleys love acronyms. You'll get used to this. But OISS stands for the Office of International Students and Scholars. And a PL is a peer liaison. And so the peer liaisons are basically students that are upperclassmen. So they're sophomores, juniors, and seniors. And they've had some time at Yale and gotten to adapt and acclimate. And then they try out to become peer liaisons. And once they're selected, they serve to just be a source of support for students in the international community. And all first years are assigned an OISS peer liaison. And so this peer liaison reaches out to you every week in a newsletter and like tells you about events and tries to keep you in with the international community. But they also offer to have meals with you as often as you want, every day if you'd want, or once a month if that's what works for you. But they've been such an amazing resource in terms of pointing me to different things that can help me feel closer to home, but also just being a nice shoulder to cry on if I need to, or just like a nice person to talk to work through those feelings. And so they've been instrumental in, trying to, in adapting and, feeling better about being away from home. It also helps that there's upperclassmen that are from my country. And so sometimes they'll invite me for some Kenyan tea and I will, jump at the opportunity and, drink my chai and, be happy and feel like home. But as well, just the way the Yale community is structured and all of the support, not just from OSS PLs, but from all of the other sources, really make you feel part of the community. And I haven't felt as homesick after coming in and like adapting and fitting in and all these things. So there's definitely support if you need it, and do use it. But then the community is so great that I haven't needed too much as time has gone by.
Yeah, I think at least for me, it's not just like the resources that Yale has. It's more about like the open culture it sort of fosters that I think allows me to, talk about my culture and connect with my culture even while I'm, thousands of miles away. And like for example, I participate with some of the Mexican students on campus, and we hang out every once in a while, and I think that just allows me to speak Spanish with my friends and sort of connect in ways that I did with people back home, and that sort of makes me feel at home, even though I'm thousands of miles away. And I think that that's an experience that's very common throughout Yale's and the international community. Question to you, Sheri. What do you do over breaks if you can't travel home?
That's a great question. So I'd say it definitely depends on which break we're talking about. So for spring break and shorter breaks, when most people who live very far can't travel back home, I try to get away a little bit. So I'm very lucky to have relatives and some friends around the US, and so I go and visit them in times like those. But there's also opportunity to plan trips with your friends, to go and visit your suite mates. I'm supposed to visit my roommate. I keep postponing it. I promise I'll do it next semester. But the American students on campus tend to be so open and welcoming and allowing us to come to their homes. So that's definitely an option. In terms of longer breaks, so for example, like the winter break, when we can't travel back home, and if this is, of course, due to financial reasons or just whatever it might be, the Office of International Students and Scholars is super supportive, and they allow you to fill in this form, and they put you up in a hotel nearby campus for the entire month. So if you aren't able to go home during winter breaks, then you're completely supported in that sense. And there's quite a few students that do use that option every year. And so you're not just alone, you'll be there with other internationals, but that's definitely an option. So there's not too much pressure to go back home during short breaks. But if you do choose to stay, there's all these different options, and it goes from your friends and your family, but also to what the school can provide and what the Office of International Scholars tries to provide for all of their students.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess this question is for me. How is polo at Yale?
Ooh.
Polo is actually one of the coolest things, perhaps the coolest things I do. I do at Yale. Before Yale, I'd never ridden a horse before. I, didn't even know college polo existed. But it's one of the cool things. One of the cool things about Yale is that you can try out new stuff, completely new stuff that you've never done before, and it's open to people that haven't done it before. So like me. Like for example, the polo community, you don't need any writing experience to join. So it's super nice to sort of, get out of campus once a week and go get on a horse for an hour with your friends, right? And eventually start competing with other colleges. And it's something super, super fun that is not available in other places. And I think it's one of the coolest things about Yale. It's not just polo, it's a bunch of stuff. I don't know how many clubs there are at Yale, probably more than 800. And they all allow you to do different things and try out different stuff. Yeah, Sheri, do you have some cool things that you do that you've never done before Yale?
I don't think it's necessarily as cool as polo. I'll put that out there. But one really cool thing that I've done is going on a ski trip that was sponsored, or I guess organized by my residential college. And so I think most, if not all, residential colleges will organize small events and excursions throughout the semester, and they subsidize the cost a lot, such that all students are able to access it financially. And so I'm from Kenya. It does not snow here. It snowed once, and we thought the world was ending. It didn't. But it typically does not snow in Kenya. We are by the equator. And so I thought, why not take this opportunity? And I absolutely enjoyed it. I got to, of course, bond with my friends, but I also got to ski for the very first time. I don't know whether I'm going to do it again, honestly. It's one of those things. But I'm really glad that I got the opportunity to try. And it's because of the wonderful programming that my residential college was able to put together. And it wasn't only just cool because I got to ski for the first time, it was also really cool because I got to get closer to people in my residential college, which has been like an amazing experience throughout in terms of just getting to know them and getting that community as a basis in my Yale experience. So that was pretty cool for me.
And I think like, although it's super cool to like play polo or ski or whatever, I think it's much more than the activity itself. It's more about getting to know a bunch of new people. Like for example, I'd say most of the people on the polo team I didn't know before polo, but just being with them and this like new experience together sort of allowed for a lot of bonding activities that, you know, and these are available in every extracurricular and in every club, in every cultural house.
That is completely true. I can attest to that. Yeah.
Okay. Sheri, what are the specific support groups for African students at Yale?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I mentioned, I'm part of two organizations on campus that are involved with African students. The first is the Yale Association for African Peace and Development, and that's more a programming, sort of more structured type of organization, and we plan a conference every year. But the other organization that I'm involved in is the Yale Association, the Yale African Students Association. So many associations, so many Africans, sorry. But so it's, in short, we refer to it as YASA. And YASA is one of the best, if not the main support group for African students on campus. And so I sit on the board as a political chair, but as a board, we organize events every single week. And so every Wednesday we meet in the Afro-American Cultural Center, and we plan something. So either it'll be a very political discussion about the happenings on the continent, or it'll be a cahoots where we'll just, joke around and have some snacks. But having that point of contact every single week where, if you're stressed, maybe you're happy that you've just finished a peace set, maybe you're just missing, some African faces, whatever it might be, there's the opportunity to come together and just, be in each other's spaces. That said, there's also different support that's more institutional from peer liaisons. So that's also an option. But as a whole, the African community is so forthcoming, so open. The group chat that we have is always booming with people offering support, offering opportunities, offering tea. As I mentioned, I also do that. So if you're on campus and you want some tea, you'll see me offering it. Just come for my tea. But in general, I think the community is just so fantastic, and having an organization that comes together to sort of discuss that and to support that is fantastic. So I'm really grateful for my African community, and I think the same can be said for many communities that are specific to regions across the world.
Yeah, and speaking of communities, Joel asked me how's the Latin American community at Yale, and there are a lot of Latin American students at Yale, and thus there are a lot of resources for them. So like the biggest one is La Casa, which is the Latin American Cultural House. But there are other resources and other groups available for however you may, like for example, for me, I'm part of the Mexican Student Organization, which is primarily composed of Mexicans, but we also have people from different countries around Latin America. From like Colombia and El Salvador and different places. There was also like an Argentine club for Argentinian students. And there's like, for example, I'm also part of SUBE, which is a Latin American group focused on leadership and exploring different areas of professional development. And so, for example, we have talks with consulting firms and financial firms and different firms around the US that sort of come and speak to Latin American students. And I think it just allows us to connect in different ways that just really enhance our experiences. So whether it's, extracurricular or professional, or simply just, speaking to someone to have a meal with them, I think the Latin American community connects in a wealth of ways, and you may find different communities that you like to be a part of. I'm part of 3, but there are many, many more. So it's up to you to sort of explore which ones you like and which ones you find interesting. Oh, and also a reminder to everyone: submit your questions through the Facebook Live. We'll be answering those as they go on for the duration of the student forum. And okay, Sheri, do international students have to file taxes?
So this is a great question, and I am sorry to say that yes, we do have to file taxes, but there is good news. So always good news and bad news. The great news is that there's so much support in terms of learning how to file taxes and the whole process as it goes. And also another great piece of news is that we do get refunds, and it depends on the amount, and there's a few varying factors, but the process is streamlined. You do get some refunds afterwards, so it's not too much to worry about. But that is a consideration, and it is a thing that happens across all institutions, just because it's US law and we have to abide by it. But Yale makes it very easy for us to do so, and gives us all the tools that we need to be able to go about doing that. So yes, but don't worry about it at all.
Yeah, and this is mostly for, this is students who have, for example, a job on campus, or are receiving a lot of financial aid from Yale. We are required by law to file those taxes, and it's really not that big of a problem. And Yale is super helpful in sort of helping you out throughout the process. For example, the Office of International Students has drop-in hours where you can literally go, and if you have any questions related to taxes or any international problems in general, and they help you out. And so that's super helpful. And it really just takes a couple, an hour or so to file those taxes. It's not that much of a problem. Okay, so Constanza asks, is it easy to invite guests to speak in your residential college?
Yeah, I'll let David take this one.
Okay, so a lot of head of colleges do speak to students to sort of try to figure out what type of people would be super helpful to bring to campus. And I think there's a lot of student input into that. And head of colleges try to bring, people that can relate to some of the students they're going to be speaking to. And a lot of, all of the colleges at Yale have what they call college teas, in which basically they bring different speakers from, every walk of life to campus to have a 45-minute talk and then tea with the speakers. And I think it's a super nice way to sort of, hear about different experiences and, different people in general. Some of these people came to Yale 30, 40 years ago, and they're telling you about their experiences, that being in, publishing a book, or being the head of this huge company. And it's super cool to sort of, have the opportunity to speak with them one-on-one and share a meal or a tea with them. Okay, Khalil from Jamaica asked, also, do you know of any automotive car enthusiast groups at Yale? Off the top of my head, I don't know, but I'm sure there are. There are literally groups for everything at Yale if you look hard enough. And if there isn't, you can get a grant to open one yourself, which is a super cool opportunity. And it just shows you how open Yale is to sort of students having the initiative to open up a group themselves.
Yeah, I actually happen to know a few randomly. So one is Bulldog Racing, and another one is the Yale Intelligent Vehicles Group. They're both engineering groups, and there's actually no experience that is required to join them. I personally haven't joined them yet, so the experience of being in them isn't something I can speak to at length. But there are those two options if you're interested in cars, but also in engineering. And those are already well-established groups, and you can get involved with those. And a great thing that I'd like to mention about extracurriculars is that Yaleys are very understanding about the fact that you'd like to try things and maybe keep some and maybe drop some. And so it's fantastic if you want to like dip your toe into a few different things. And so you can try both bulldog racing and Yale intelligent vehicles and see which one would work out for you. But there's not too much pressure to commit completely in the very beginning. So you have that.
Awesome. Khalil also asks, is there a disadvantage to not doing OISS?
That's a great question. I think I could best answer this by giving all the advantages, and then it's more of a value judgment of whether that's something you're willing to, take on or leave. So of course, there's the logistical things that OSS or OIS rather provides, and so that's opening up a bank account, which can be a bit tedious. Getting your SIM card done, learning about basic US laws that you need to abide by, like getting signatures on some forms like I-20s, or just making sure that you're enrolled in enough courses. And this is information that you can get regardless. And these are things that you can do on your own, getting a bank account open or getting a SIM card. But it's just really nice to have that process completely streamlined and delivered to you in a way that makes a lot of sense and isn't too stressful for you as you're trying to adapt to the US and to college. Another really big advantage for me was getting over jet lag. And so I needed that entire week and a few days afterwards to just adapt to being within the US. And so if that's something you're worried about, it's definitely a great thing to get involved in so that you can have that sort of basis. One of the really important thing about OSS is that it's a very social program. And so you get to meet so many internationals. You get to get really close to them and get to build that friendship and that foundation during the first few days. It's definitely possible to do so after OIS, and there'll be opportunity to do so through events hosted by organizations like the ISO, but it's just much easier to do so in that time. And so the disadvantage of not attending OIS is sort of losing out on all of that in the way that it's provided. It's made very easy and accessible. That doesn't mean that you can't make friends with internationals or that you can't open a bank account. You definitely can, whether or not you come to OIS, but it's just provided in such a streamlined way that is really beneficial to most internationals. And adapting to the US and adapting to university and just all of these things can be a lot. So having that sorted already in the very beginning is it's really an asset to your college experience. So if you feel confident that you'd be okay without that, then you definitely can consider doing another program or not coming. But if any of those things stand out to you as things you might value, then you definitely should consider OS in that sense.
Okay. Juan asks, how is your adaptation to the typical American classroom? I went to a school that was somewhat similar with the American system, so I didn't find that much of a difference, other than the fact that I wasn't used to some of your classes being large and some of your classes being small. I think that just takes getting used to. And also, for example, in the US, it's very encouraged that you sort of participate in seminars. And I know that, at least for me, that wasn't what I was used to in high school. And it sort of takes some getting used to, but it definitely adds a lot to the experience. And I think it's, a very good way to learn.
Yeah, I had a bumpier transition, not that it was horrible, but so I had two high school experiences. I did part of my high school in Kenya, following the Kenyan system, and the other part I did in Wales, in a small town in the middle of nowhere, but we did do the IB, the International Baccalaureate. So then I had sort of that transition step, but at the same time, we use very different terminology than Americans tend to use. And so, for instance, in my multivariable calculus class in my first semester, my professor would refer to AP Calc and BC Calc all the time. So he'd say, "You did this in BC Calc, don't worry about it." And I'd say, "Oh, sorry, what is that?" that was probably the extent to which I struggled in that sense, just the difference in terminology. But the beauty of it is that professors are so open, and they're aware that you might have a different way of identifying this versus that, and it's just being able to vocalize that when it does happen, because there's so many different education systems. We're all from such different backgrounds, and they want to do their best to cater to that. So it's just being able to raise your hand or go to your professor at the end of the class and say, what did you mean when you said global maximum? I thought that was called a minimum. And they'll say, yeah, it's the same thing, don't worry, and you'll be fine. So I was just getting used to vocalizing when things were a bit different than I was used to. But then I didn't have any other issues other than that. And I also used resources like the writing center on campus, because I wasn't used to the US style of writing. So I would take my essays to be read and just go and seek advice. And once I walked in and I was like, what is my thesis here? I gave this whole guy my argument, we put it on the whiteboard. He was very confused for a while, but in the end we got the thesis and I could then write my essay. So there's so much support. Everyone is so willing to meet you halfway. It's just being able to express that. So it should be a good transition if you're willing to, just put in that small step when you need it.
Sheri, Annie asks, what is the computer science community at Yale like?
Yeah, so I have been part of it for a shorter time than David, but in the time that I have been involved, I really liked it. It sounds really odd, but I really enjoy office hours. It's the time during the week when you get to come in and have your questions answered by either teaching assistants or undergraduate learning assistants, but you also get to make so many friends. There's been times that I've been, mulling over a question and struggling a bit, and somebody will come over and be like, "Oh, I did that. Should we talk through it?" So it's been very collaborative. It's been very open. It's been a very smooth transition thus far, just because everyone has been so willing to share and be collaborative and just be open. And so I really enjoyed learning CS in the way that I have. I actually really look forward to office hours, and now that it's virtual, it's still a very happy part of my day at this point. So I would definitely recommend the CS community on campus.
Yeah, and also they provide, I think with CS and especially, they provide a lot of support during all the problem sets you have to do. That being the professors themselves, or what they call the undergraduate learning assistants, where basically students that, for example, took this CS class last year and performed really well on it, they sort of coach students, current students throughout the whole class. And it sort of, helps both the professors and the students themselves to sort of, be on track with all their assignments and sort of grasp these very complex problems in a much better way.
I will actually add, I remember I was struggling once on a question about a Turing machine, and I stopped David after a meeting and I was like, David, help me. And he sat with me for 20 minutes and walked me through the entire thing. And so it's not only very structured support, it's also the fact that people doing CS are just lovely people that will stop their entire day and show you how a Turing machine works. And so I recommend the community, and I recommend David as well as a CS teacher. 10 over 10.
Amazing. Constanza from Italy asks, do you guys pre-order furniture, linens, etc. for your room, or should we get that during pre-orientation? I think it really depends on each person. I know there's a certain company at Yale that sort of, prepares everything beforehand, and you get to your room and all of the, your bed sheets and everything are, there for you. Or you can order them yourself. It's really up to you, what you find more comfortable and what you're willing to spend. To furniture, I personally didn't buy any furniture. Yale comes, all dorms come with beds and desks and everything you might need. But there are things like, maybe a desk lamp that you might like, that you can buy when you're on campus. So during your international orientation, there are a couple trips that take you different places. For example, I remember the Wednesday of my orientation program, we all went to Target, which is this store a couple minutes from campus, and we bought all of our stuff together. So OIS, like the Office of International Students knows that some of these students, don't bring desk lamps from, wherever you might be coming from. So they make sure that we are able to buy those during orientation.
I did use the pre-ordering system and I really liked it as well. I did go to Target as well and just pick up a few things like, snacks and like laundry pods. But I found it very convenient personally. So if you're interested in it, then I would also recommend it. It's very convenient. And they also think of things that I wouldn't typically think of, like mattress toppers. I didn't know that was a thing. Love mine currently. And so if you are interested, then it is a good investment. But if you're not, then as David mentioned, there's so much opportunity to get everything you need once you're actually on campus.
Is a language requirement different for international students, Sheri?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's different if you want to make it. I will explain. So essentially, all students are required to fulfill a language requirement, but if you are native or if you have native fluency in a second language, then you can bypass some of that requirement. So as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, instead of having to do multiple, I think 3 courses, you get to only do 2 courses that required. So I know very many Kenyans that will do a Swahili placement test that will place them into the level 5 band, which is the highest level. It goes from 1st to 5, and then they'll take 2 classes just to fulfill that requirement. So if you are fluent in a second language, it makes it much easier for you to fulfill your full language requirement, as there's much less that's required of you. And if your language is offered, then you can take your language and not have to learn it from scratch. But there's also the option to learn a language from scratch. So I speak English. I'm also native in Swahili, but I am choosing to take Spanish, and I'm pursuing my 3rd level of Spanish now. So there's the option to either use your fluency to tap out of as many classes or to do the entire sequence, and people choose either depending on what works for them.
Yeah. So like, for example, I'm from Mexico, so I speak Spanish. And for example, some of my Mexican friends decided to take Spanish again, which is totally fine. They took like higher level Spanish. But then you also have the opportunity to take, a 3rd language. So like, for example, I'm taking Italian right now, which I'm really, really enjoying. And so you can fulfill your language requirement in whatever way you like the best. And it's really up to you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sheri, what's the best way to prepare for New England weather?
I think in terms of mentally preparing, I think just soaking up all of the sun before you can get on campus. That said, when you do get on campus during summer, it tends to be very hot and humid. So you do have that transition between August and September into like mid-October, when it's just getting a bit cooler and cooler as it goes down. You don't actually have to do too much to get ready for it yourself, because Yale does provide some support if you do need it. So the first support that's provided if you're on financial aid, and if you come from a country that doesn't experience winter or as harsh winter as New England can be, you can apply through this system called Safety Net that allows the disbursement of funds that aren't typical. You can apply for a winter clothing grant that's $250, and it allows you to get everything you need, get a nice coat, get some gloves, just get some basics just to help you transition. So it's a great opportunity, it's a great resource, and I know many people that do use it. Another thing that really helps is that the Office of International Students and Scholars, OISS, plans some trips throughout the fall semester where they take you to, I think, Burlington, which is this really cool store that has huge coats and all of the winter gear that you might need. And so they plan trips and take you on a Saturday for you to be able to get that ready. So in terms of like physically getting what you need, there's going to be support for that, either financially or logistically. There's also the support that your OISS peer liaisons can give you in terms of advice on what might be better. So that was how I personally transitioned. In terms of like physically preparing, I think you just get used to it, you adapt. It's one of those things that's a new challenge. I got a hot water bottle. I have very many fluffy socks. And so you just keep rolling with the punches and eventually it gets better. And the snow days are so beautiful. They're amazing. There's a first year snowball fight. That's one of my favorite traditions, when first years meet on campus and just throw snowballs at each other, which is very fun when you're throwing it, not as fun when you're getting hit by it, but it's an amazing tradition. And we have to thank the New England weather for that. So that's probably what I'd say about that.
And one thing I want to add, like my first time at Yale, I thought I was the only person that sort of came from a place that had never seen snow, but I was clearly not. Like, a lot of people are in the same boat. I think not a lot of people have actually experienced New England weather, and sort of we go through this together. And you get tips from upperclassmen on, like, what sweater to buy or what jacket is super warm. So yeah, and also you should get a camera, because those snowy days are really just amazing. Like, the whole campus just turns white, and it's one of the most beautiful scenes at Yale. Okay. If you observe a holiday in a country that is not observed in the US, are you allowed to miss your classes for the day?
That's a great question. As far as I know, you are allowed to miss if it's a religious holiday, but missing classes in general, you'd need to go through your dean of your residential college, and they're both your residential advisor, but also your academic advisor, and so they'd be in the best position to let you know whether you can miss a class or not. And so they would be the person that would, say yes or no to requests like that. For religious holidays, I do know that that's observed. For specific holidays that are to your country, like an Independence Day, I'm not quite certain since I've never tried to use that myself. But you do have your deans there who provide support and give you advice and give you authorizations to do things like those, and they would be the person that would have to make that decision if you were interested in pursuing that.
Yes, and speaking of, like, deans also provide, help if, say, something happens at home and you have to go back or whatever. You talk to your dean and they help you sort things out, with professors and your classes. So they make sure that you're pretty much, like, okay and safe. So they are there to help you, which I think is very, very helpful. Would you recommend the FOOT or the OISS pre-orientation program?
I am a little bit biased, but I would definitely recommend the OISS pre-orientation program. So I'm also an incoming counselor for the program. So I will be one of your counselors and I would be there to smile at you and give you Kenyan tea. But other than my face, I mentioned some of the benefits that OISS provides, just from, like, logistically helping you settle in, to helping you settle in culturally, and all of the amazing social programming. I know everybody has their favorite part of OISS. I think mine is when we go to the outdoor center, which is this amazing plot of land that Yale has sort of an hour away from campus. And there's, like, a beautiful lake, and there's volleyball courts and basketball courts, and you go there for a day and just swim in the lake and play with, I guess, your friends. And it seems like it's not too big an event, but I really, really enjoyed it. It was one of my favorite days in my entire Yale experience. So if you want to be in the outdoors, OISS will give you that for at least one day. So I definitely recommend OIS, just for all that I've mentioned. And I think it's also just important to underline that it's not only logistical. It's not just about learning about US law and getting SIM cards. It's about the friends you make, the dinners that you have, the amazing, experience that you do have during that week getting adapted, and just the friends you make. So I definitely would recommend OIS.
Yeah, I'm also extremely biased on this topic. And as Sheri, I would also recommend OISS for international students, because it's a very, as Sheri said, it's not just, the things you have to do, such as, open a bank account and get your phone number. It's about hanging out with super cool people for a week and getting to know them. And these are the first people you meet at Yale. And at least for me, these are the people that have, like, become some of my best friends over my 2 years at Yale. So again, super biased, but OISS is a super cool experience. Okay. Sheri, how is doing the CS and econ double major? Does it ever get really overwhelming? Since CS with another subject is only one major, would you recommend the second major?
Yeah, that's a great question. So to answer the first part of your question, so CS and Econ is actually offered as a joint major, not a double major, which I find fantastic because it means that I can get diplomas in these two areas, but it also means that I have time and space to explore all of my other subjects that I'm interested in, or interests rather. I personally have not found it overwhelming because the way the course starts is that you have to do the prerequisites and the requirements generally in each field. So of course you have to have a very good foundation of computer science and a very good foundation of economics for you to then merge the two in a really fantastic way. So then you end up doing two different things and then doing classes that bring them together and eventually writing a thesis that does do that. So it's not overwhelming at all. It's the way that it's organized and set out is that it's very doable. It's 15 or 14 courses, I believe, as opposed to having to do 12 in CS and 12 in econ separately. And that means that you just have a much more compact experience that is set out in a better way. And I think the way that our advisors are set up, so in your first year, you have an advisor who has studies or is a professor in a field that's adjacent to what you're learning most of the time. And then once you declare your major, your advisor becomes the director of undergraduate studies in your major or in one of your two majors. So that means that the person that's giving you advice knows what they're saying. And if they don't, then like my advisor, he didn't know about my language requirement in Swahili, but he found the Swahili teacher and, talked to him about it and then came back to me. So these people are very dedicated, they're very knowledgeable, and they're there to help you set out your course. So it hasn't felt overwhelming in terms of getting my requirements done. There's a full 36 that are required, and there's only like 14 or 15 that are for this one major. So it's not too much to do, and you have so much support if you want to pursue something that might seem a bit more challenging. So I would definitely recommend it. And in terms of recommending a major, I think it just depends on what you're interested in. I'd recommend that you be clear about it a bit earlier. So maybe by the end of your first year, know what one or two majors you want to do, just so it's easier for you to do. But I know people that change their major in their junior year. So it's really like what you make of it, and it's not overwhelming because you have so much support in making these decisions and in charting out your course in general.
Yeah, like adding on to that, I think one of the cool things specifically about the econ and CS major is that it sort of gives you room to explore things that have, nothing to do with econ and computer science, since it's just 14 courses instead of the, usual like 24 courses if you were to do a double major. So like, at least for me, what the things I enjoy most about my academic experience at Yale is sort of venturing into topics that I've never considered before. So like, for example, I'm majoring in econ and CS, but I'm taking like art history classes. And Yale sort of allows you to do that, and sort of compressing the two majors into one joint major allows you to sort of explore a lot more in different areas that, like you never thought you might be interested in. Okay, what was your experience choosing your major, Sheri? Did you start college knowing what you wanted to major in?
That's a great question. I started very, very undecided. And one amazing thing, again, I'm going to plug the OIS pre-orientation program. Another part of it is that there's a small session when upperclassmen do sort of advising. And so they let you drop and hop between different majors. So there'll be like a room that has math and computer science majors, and there'll be a room that has engineering majors. And thankfully, there'll be a room that has undecided majors, or people that are currently undecided. And so I hopped in between those three rooms, and in the room with the undecided majors, that was when I learned the most. There were so many students that didn't necessarily know what they specifically wanted to do, but had an idea of like how they wanted to combine different things. And so I walked into that and I got so much amazing advice and I followed it. And so one of the things that really helped me decide what I wanted to do was going into the Office of Career Strategy and speaking to one of the advisors. And I just came in and I was like, I don't know whether I want to pursue STEM or whether I want to pursue humanities or do a mix of the two. And she pointed me to so many different resources, urged me to speak to students, and I spoke to a few. That's how I came to learn about the CS and Econ major, and I was sold afterwards. And so there's so much room for you to decide what you want. You can come in knowing what you want the very first day and declare, and you can wait until the very last moment. But there's so many people willing to help you along the way. There's so much room for you to change, and there's so much support if you ever need to go back or go forward in a decision. So I really enjoyed it, and I am really happy with my major now. But if you asked me this question the beginning of my first semester, I would be in the undecided room completely. So it's a nice transition to see.
Yes, and I think like most students at Yale end up, exploring a lot of things while they're here and end up changing their majors to a bunch of different things or combining them in ways that they didn't think they would do so before. So like, for example, when I got to Yale, I was very interested in like tech and computer science. I didn't really think I was going to do econ at all, but then getting here and, experiencing some of the classes really changed my mind. And working with my advisor to like telling him what I really liked and what the type of work that I like to do, he suggested this major, and I think it really helped me sort of decide. But it's also fine if you haven't decided. Like here, you're gonna get the chance to like explore a bunch of different stuff, and you'll end up choosing something that you really, really like. Okay, Sheri, last question.
Ooh.
Last question before we wrap up. Could you talk about a time you experienced that international love at Yale?
Yes, I think that the time that I'd probably talk about on and on again was our first reunion after OIS. As there was a little get together that the counselors planned. And it was really nice to see those faces after a while of like not being together and being around each other like as often as we were during that first week. And I remember it was like really calm in the beginning, then we played some music and danced. But at the end, I remember all holding hands and singing Photograph by Ed Sheeran. And I was so confused. I was like, how did we get here? How did this circle form? Who started playing that song? But it was just the fact that it was people that I'd come so close to become so close with rather in the first week, and then being reunited with them again, and just doing something completely random and cute together. And so I just really enjoy the OISS reunions, in general, the events held by the International Students Organization. And that was one that I really loved. And now whenever I hear that song, I like tear up a bit because I'm like, I remember when I was with my internationals, holding hands, like in a circle, crying and, singing. So that was a really nice moment for me personally.
I think for me personally, I think Sheri, you mentioned this when during orientation, all of the international students have sort of a field trip to this land Yale has, about an hour away from campus, where there's a huge lake. And there was this activity where you just went out like canoeing with 4 other people. And I was placed with like 4 people I had never met before. And we spent like an hour in a canoe just like talking. And ever like since then, we've been like best friends ever since. So I think the international community allows for these like different social events where you can meet people from every walk of life and get to know their stories, where they come from. And it just allows you to create even more friends. That sort of brings the international community together in a bunch of different ways. Okay, Sheri, any last thoughts?
Yeah,
Before we wrap up?
I'd just like to say thank you guys so much for joining us. I really enjoyed getting to answer your questions. I'm an ardent member of the international community. I just love the community that we have, and I'm so glad that you guys get to join us, that we get to welcome you into our little, community and sing songs with you eventually. And I'm really grateful that you guys were able to listen to us. And if you do have any other questions for me or for David, then please do reach out to us. You can find us through the Admitted Students Network. You can also find us, or I guess find other internationals and just connect with other Yaleys through the Facebook group and through the Instagram. So do that, but do feel free to reach out because I really enjoyed this and I do love getting to know you guys and answering your questions. So I hope to hear from any of you if you have anything that I could answer.
Thank you so much for joining. And again, if you have any other questions, feel free to post them in the Admitted Student Networks page, or address it directly to us if you have any specific questions. We'd love to answer those questions, and we hope to see you on campus in the fall.